Welcome in the voice of Indiana University Athletics, Don Fischer. Don, nothing to say but a heartbreaking weekend for IU men's and women's basketball, and really took a hit last night with that loss. But just a bad weekend overall for the basketball programs.
Yep, no question about that. They ran into a hurricane.
Good one.
Nevertheless, both of them got knocked out by the Miami Hurricanes, which is ironic in itself, but without question, very disappointing for both these programs. And congratulations to Terry Morin's team. They were phenomenal all year long, and just had one ball game, but took them out, and that's all it takes at this time of year. It's really tough in that regard. And then, of course, the same thing happened to Indiana's men coming on Sunday, which was disappointing. No question about that. The loss wasn't as disappointing as the performance was, in my opinion. And we've seen this on an up and down basis all through the last month and a half of the season. And you can say what you want, but my opinion stands. I think these guys were wore out. I think that the problem is at this point, and the Big Ten is learning this, I think, the hard way. You play 20 Big Ten games every year. It is a war. You are literally going up against teams that can beat you. Everybody in the league can beat you. It is really tough to go through. I think they ought to go back to 18 games. I know that sounds silly because of it's only 2 games, but play 2 of those and you only got 16 in the last 2 months of the season, which gives you a little more time in between. But that's never going to happen. We know that. That's all a pipe dream at this juncture. So continue to deal with it. And now you're going to add 2 more teams to the mix. Are they going to go to 22 Big Ten games when USC and UCLA come into the league? I mean, think about it, boys.
Wow.
Somebody at the upper level needs to think about these things and the ramifications of these things, because now you're going to be traveling across the country for at least 2 games during the year. It's crazy stuff. It really is. And anyway, long story short, Indiana didn't, they succumbed to it. And the difficulty of going through this 2-month period is really a strain on these players. I don't think there's any question about it. And in my opinion, it's why the Big Ten isn't getting any farther than maybe 1 team into the Sweet 16 this year. Well, we have 2 last year to the Sweet 16. And the year before that, it was about the same thing. You might have got 1 to the Elite 8, but nobody's been in the Final 4 here in the last, how many years? 6, 7?
Yep. And to that point, Don, I saw this statistic in which the Big Ten has put in the last 3 seasons, 26 teams into the NCAA tournament. 4 of them have been to the Sweet 16 to the Sweet 16. Yeah. So to that point, I do think that the scheduling, I don't know, because when did they make the switch to 20? 3 years ago? 20 years or 20 games was 3 or 4 years ago. So it lines up with the Big Ten not having success in March and playing a full 20-game schedule. So I completely agree with you. But as you said, it's all about getting that $1 billion television contract. So it's hard for me to believe they're ever going to make some sort of change on it.
No, I agree with that too. Once you've taken the toothpaste out of the tube, you can't put it back in. And let's face it, and I can't wait till we get a new commissioner in the Big Ten. I'm sorry to say that in the sense of Kevin Warren, but I just never thought that he was the right fit for the conference. I saw his first press conference, or he had a press conference at every school. He went to every school and had a press conference. His first to introduce himself to the league, and I thought, I know what his background is. He was never anything in athletics other than I don't know what you'd call it.
Administrator?
Yeah, some kind of administrator. He has no athletic background other than his kid played, and maybe he played. But that doesn't make you a commissioner of a conference that needs somebody that runs the show. And he let go a lot of people based on what I was told from that conference office that had great backgrounds and knew what they were doing, and got in a whole bunch of new people in there. And based on what I've seen, what I deal with and the media aspect of it, I don't think it's been an upgrade in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I would argue that it's kind of slid down the ladder a little bit. The way they do things is different. So, but I'm an old man. I know how things were done when they were successful, and now I know.
You have to look at the Big Ten, though. I mean, I think it lines up and it agrees with you in and of itself. I agree with you too, but you can look at the mistakes that were made and the missteps that were made, and the Ohio State Indiana football thing. That's just one of them, but there were just many things that he just did not seem.
Well, when COVID came about, and he makes this snap judgment, we're not doing this, we're out, we're not doing it. And then they come back and they do it, then they play. And it's just, there's so many things. And I hate to be a negative Nelly when it comes to that role, but I just think that the Big Ten made a mistake. And hopefully they rectify it in the right way. And most of us know who we think it should be, but I'm not about to say that because I know the presidents of the conference would be upset if we said anything about who it should be. And the last thing they're going to do is hire anybody that we think should be the conference commissioner.
Especially if they're the current commissioner of the ACC.
But I mean,
screw it up, Jim. What do you think?
Way to go. Yeah, I mean, and I just want to say this really quick.
I took the pressure off you, so you didn't have to do it.
There you go.
I'll say it all day long. That's the guy that should have been the commissioner to begin with.
Right.
When that happened, everyone knew it. They were like, "What are you doing?" And instantly he becomes a commissioner of the ACC.
Well, and of course, that the guy that was in charge of that committee was who? Miles Brand. Or not Miles Brand. I'm sorry. What's his name?
The Gary Barta.
No,
McRobbie.
Yeah. Who doesn't know a thing about sports?
Oh my God.
Of that group.
Well, that explains that.
I just wanted to chime in on this before we jump back into Indiana basketball. To your point, Don, I always got the sense that Kevin Warren was lobbying for his next job, to be back in the NFL or to be the commissioner of the NFL. His name's already been mentioned as a potential candidate to replace Roger Goodell in the future. So I just always got that vibe that he didn't care about the Big Ten. He cared about Kevin Warren getting his next job.
That's exactly right. He came in and he was a politician. He is a politician. Yeah. He knows what he's trying to do in the sense of, for him, and I get that. I mean, look, everybody's out for themselves in that context. You want to achieve a level that you set a goal for, whatever the case may be. But you have to look at the complete picture of that person and what they're capable and qualified to do. And I cannot conceive. I don't want to go there. You know what I'm going to say, and I'm not about to say it, but I am going to tell you this, that the Big Ten is not the same organization as it was when it was under Jim Delaney.
Yeah.
And as much as I dislike Jim Delaney knew what he was doing as a commissioner.
And did it well, no doubt. Indiana basketball now comes to an end for both teams, like we said, but for the men's program, there is going a huge difference between the men's and the women's. There's going to be a huge difference in faces on this program next year, in my opinion. We know that they're losing 3 seniors in Miller Kopp, Brace Thompson, and Trace Jackson Davis, but I think that in today's age that there's going to be others that hit the portal, but Indiana's going to have to do a good job in the portal because they need to upgrade in a few places, Don. They have got to get shooters in here, and you don't know who all you're losing just yet, but you know you have to replace Trace Jackson Davis. You got Malik Renew, but you still have to have somebody else. You're losing Race Thompson as well.
Right. The transfer portal this year will be as important as it has ever been for for this Indiana basketball program. And obviously it hasn't been around that long, but it's been in practice now for what? This is the third year. And the portal this year will be huge, because if there were high school players out there that were still available, Indiana would be going after them. And I have no idea if there's anybody that they're going after who would be a freshman at college next year that's still available that they think can really be a factor. And they're going to have somebody that can come in here and be a factor right away, because, again, you're losing Trace and Race. And Malik obviously is a credible fix for the post, but you're going to have somebody behind him. And Logan Duncombe, there's a real question mark on whether he's going to come back or not, whether he can play to the level of which Indiana needs. And so, therefore, you're going to have somebody out of that portal, I would think, that can fix this issue. And they're going to need wings. They need wing players who are 6'6".
Badly.
Just look at what Miami had on the floor, and compare Indiana with Miami's athletes and athleticism and size and what they were able to do with it. And I'm not putting the Indiana roster down in any way. I'm just simply saying, look at the facts. And again, part of that is, in my opinion, was due to the scheduling and the journey that Indiana had through the Big Ten. But again, from an athletic standpoint, you've got to be able to find guys that can absolutely score the basketball. And it doesn't need to be just three-point shooting, but it has to be a factor there. And we're giving up Miller Kopp, who's the best three-point shooter on this team, who should have shot a lot more three-pointers, in my opinion, through his career at Indiana. But he's not going to be back. And who else on this team is a three-point shooter? Troy Galloway, you could say, yeah, but he's kind of the same role that Miller's had. He's not taking a lot of threes, and he's doing more. He plays so hard at both ends of the floor that I think he was one of the guys that was really wore out at the end of the year. And he didn't have a very good game against Kent, but he had a really good ball game against Miami. At the same time, it boils down to this. They have got to upgrade the level of talent on their roster. And if they are not able to do that through the portal, next year is going to be a long year.
And tell me if I'm wrong on this, Don, but it seems like to me in the month of March, the biggest issue, not just with Indiana, but across the Big Ten, is the Big Ten they are bereft of players who can drive the basketball to the basket and be aggressive, either get to the foul line or convert. It seems like the Big Ten is almost more of a jump shooting league. And I don't know if that's because you typically have had guys like Zach Edey, Kofi Coburn, Luke, some of those guys on the interior, Trace Jackson Davis. But to me, when you watch that Indiana game, you talk about the athleticism. There's just Jalen Hood-Schifino can get to the rim, but outside of that, you got to have two or three guys that if you're not shooting the ball well, they can at least get to the rim, get you some easy baskets, or at least draw contact and get to the free throw line. That's been a problem for Indiana and the Big Ten, I think, in the past 3 or 4 years.
Well, and to your point of what kind of players Indiana has, there's a style change that has to take place too.
Yeah,
I mean, that you're not going to be able to pick and roll your way into Trace Jackson Davis every time you walk on the floor next year. I mean, Malik is a really good post player. I think he's going to be terrific, but he is not as the same kind of an athlete that Trace is. So he's going to be easier to double because he's not as quick and as athletic. He's got a tremendous touch inside. He has got to learn how to pass the ball out of the double team, and he's got to become more proficient at that. But at the same time, if you can't do the same things with Malik as you did with Trace, and you're not going to be able to, in my opinion, on a consistent basis, you've got to have a different way of going about playing the game. And I think that is going to be in the coaching staffs and Mike Woodson's parameter to do and to change, because I think their style of play will have to change next year with this group that they currently possess and whoever they bring in off the transfer portal. And that'll dictate a little bit about how much of a style change drama we're going to see.
I agree with you completely. And before I get to that, Leslie, with a great catch to your point earlier, pointing out that the team that actually made it in from the Big Ten didn't play all 20 games.
That's a good point.
They had one less game to play.
Yeah.
So by technicality, that even further backs up your point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. And we've seen that so many times. Teams like Purdue that get in, not just Purdue, but and face teams that are so different, athletic, fast. Indiana obviously missing Xavier Johnson in a game against Miami, but wow, the athleticism. If it didn't come through on TV, if you were there in person, it was mind-boggling to watch those guys. And Omier, Norchad Omier, every time you're looking around following the action and look, and damn it, he's underneath the basket and he's got position every time. He had position. It was a mind-boggling, and he pulled down 17 rebounds, 8 offensive rebounds, which is as many as Trace Jackson Davis had in total for the game for Indiana. So they just looked out of sorts. But this team was also one that they seem like they'd get full of themselves after big wins. And then they didn't come back with that same intensity that they would have at post Purdue win. They come home and get blown out. We've seen it happen a couple of times, and they just didn't seem to have this. They had great intensity on Friday night, but it was not the same on Sunday, and I don't know why.
Well, that stretch that they had, if you remember, after they got beat by Penn State, Northwestern and Penn State beat them in Iowa. Of course, they lost to Iowa too. That to start the restart of the Big Ten season, they had that stretch there where they played terrific basketball for 9 or 10 ball games. I mean, they played really, really well through that period. And again, it boils down to, in my opinion, and I know you're saying they get full of themselves a little bit, but again, I think it boiled down to the fact at the end of the season, that last month or so, they started up and down, up and down, up and down. And I just think, and of course, the roster changed a little bit too, in the sense of, Race was out for a while, and without question, the fatigue factor, I think, just set in. I just think it was such a critical thing, and maybe part of that's on the coaching staff too, in the sense of, you got to give these guys some rest. You can't practice 2 hours every day and look at film for 35 minutes and time after day after day. It becomes it's a grind anyway. It's a grind to play these Big Ten matchups. And I just think you got to give them a little less. I mean, Bob Knight started practicing less and less starting with the 1st of February every year because he wanted players to have their legs at the end of the season. And he was a master at that, understanding that. He didn't like it all the time because Knight loved to practice, especially if they weren't playing well. But he knew that if he ran them into the ground, that they weren't going to be able to perform at the end of the season. And so you back off and practice and those kinds of things. And I wasn't at a lot of practices here in the month of February, so I don't know how much they backed off. But Mike told me on our talk show one night that they hadn't backed off practice at all. This was back maybe mid-February. And I asked him that very question on the air. I said, how much are you practicing now? Have you backed off any of your practice time? And he said, no. So I'm just saying.